getting people to change there's nothing harder, me included. And so we have found that the best use of our time, at least early on, is really challenging the leader to decide what is it that you want. And if they get that fire lit, then they have the motivation to start doing the things to change. But if you try to do this surface level, force people at the action level into a mold, outside in transformation, it doesn't last.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, John Gallagher. Gary Harpst, welcome to the Uncommon Leader Podcast. It's great to have you on the show today. How you doing?
Doing great, John. Thank you so much. This is going to be an adventure here for the next 30 minutes or so.
Excellent. Gary, I've been looking forward to our conversation for a while, no doubt about it. And I want to start you off with the same first question, though, that I always start all my first-time guests. And that's to tell me a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are today as a leader or as a person.
Well, the story is actually one that didn't really become evident to me, its significance, until much later. Somewhere in my career, somebody suggested that to understand who you are, go through the first 10 years of your life, the next 10 years, the next 10 years, and each 10-year period, and write down the strongest memories you have. And it was that process that made me realize that when I was under 10, I had this compulsion. I grew up on a farm, by the way, and farm in the 50s where we had a lot of tractors and barns and those sorts of things. So as a youngster, you have lots of opportunities to do things. And no internet, nothing like that. So you had to entertain yourself outside. I, for some reason, always drew to when my father was in the fields or whatever, I would go out and sweep and organize our garage. And I was sort of had this compulsion to bring order out of that whole area. And at the time, it just seemed totally natural to me. My older brother thought I was nuts. He says, "Why aren't you out playing or doing this or that and the other thing?" But what I realized later on was, God wires us in certain ways, and he changes who we are, but he amplifies what is in us. And it turns out that precursor in the under 10 years has been a thread through my whole life about organizing things. And even this latest book I wrote is on that same topic. So that was a real aha for me to realize this imprint was there very early in my life.
Using that through line is powerful. And we have so many different stories as children, to your point, that still impact who we are. And sometimes we don't even realize it until someone points it out to us and really makes that happen. And I do appreciate you mentioning your book. That's really what we're here to talk about, is your latest book, Built to Beat Chaos, Biblical Wisdom for Leading Yourself and Others. So let me ask off the bat, who did you write this book for, and what was the inspiration to write it? This is your third book.
Yes. By the way, I wrote two books earlier, probably 20 years ago, and I concluded I wasn't going to do another one. Don't ever tell God that you're not going to do something. And I was not planning on writing another book. And somebody approached me unsolicited and said, "Would you consider writing a book?" And I said, "No." And somebody else approached me, and I just thought it was curious, and it got me thinking about it. And I thought, no, I really don't want to. Well, one day I was praying in the morning and saying, "God, I don't ever want to say no to you. So if you want me to do this, be clear." And unsolicited, an editor from Wiley called me, which doesn't normally happen. And he told me that they were interested in having me write a book. And I said, "Well, no." And then he kept calling back. And finally I said, "Well, I'll write one if you'll allow me complete freedom to integrate what I've learned about faith and business." And they said, "No problem with that." And so that was the sort of the motivation behind it. Is I'm in my fifth decade as a CEO, hard to believe, and the whole journey, that whole 5 decades, has been a desire to integrate, to run great businesses, but to do it in a way that integrated with what I knew were biblical principles. And so this has been like this 5-decade learning laboratory. So the book itself is me sort of organizing what I've learned in these 5 decades and trying to get it in a consumable form for other leaders, and particularly leaders that have this question about how do I live my faith in a work environment. And so that was the motivation behind it.
So outside the story of Wiley then pushing you, and to your point, you never tell God, God's got quite a sense of humor when it comes to either trying to say no to something that's probably there, or certainly asking for something and how he gives it to us one way or the other. I could
Amen.
spend days talking stories about that. On your LinkedIn profile, right underneath your kind of short bio says, achieve kingdom impact through whole business and whole person health. So the kingdom impact component, 50 years, 5 decades, 5 decades of being a CEO, was that always a big part of who you were in your business, or was there a point in which that kind of shifted for you, became a big part of it?
Thank you for asking that question. It's when we started the business, there were 3 of us in a Bible study, and we were serious about trying to figure out how to live our lives, not as a Sunday experience, but if faith in God was real, it should affect everything. And that was the genesis for us starting a business. But I think I spent at least 3 of those decades, maybe 4, with the mindset that being a Christian meant, of course, tell the truth and have integrity and take care of people. And all those things are true, and they're biblical. God says the greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. They're all true. But and we were open about our faith, and everybody knew who worked with us that was important to us. But I would say in the last few years, I began to get this different model that God is sort of laying on my heart. And I describe it in 3 layers. Think of a pyramid. That kingdom impact, I finally had to make some definitions of my own, because I talked to a lot of other believers and they would use different phrases like honoring God with their business and faith driven. And there's just a lot of phrases we use. And I had to sort out my own thinking. And so I ended up with a pyramid. It was sort of body, soul, and spirit ministry to people. And the body side, it represented the basics of a good business. People want to work for an organization that's well managed, that doesn't lie to them, that gives them good job opportunities, the sort of things that it doesn't matter whether you're a person of faith or not, you would agree with that. Excellence in business is basic. And the next layer is becoming more popular now. Popular is not the right word, but the phrase soul care. Post-COVID, there are organizations hiring other organizations like chaplaincy, et cetera, to take care of their people, to just call them and build relationships with them. And the secular term for that is soul care. The Bible has a different meaning for soul. But this second layer kind of fits where I lived for decades, which is love your neighbor as yourself. So if you see somebody that needs help, you help them. And you try to be kind and those sorts of things. And I more recently, God has been challenging me to move to the third layer and say the story is incomplete. I can love you, but I cannot heal what's broken inside of you. I can't, quote, forgive sins. I can't give you a new life that God talks about. And so that third layer, in my way of thinking and looking at the Bible, you're not really having kingdom impact unless you have explicit strategies to do all 3. If you do 2 of the 3, you are doing good work and you're doing good things. Society needs it. But the gospel is about doing something that only Jesus can do. And if I stop short of at least make what I think it's 1 Peter says, be ready always, or James, be ready always to give a reason for your hope. Mm-hmm. That's what I've shifted to in the last 3 or 4 years, is coming along businesses and saying, you can do all 3. It's possible. And the more I've studied podcasts like yours and many, many resources, you begin to realize that one of our biggest enemies is we think we can't do it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there are many people doing it and doing it really well. And so that's been very empowering to me. and has become kind of my mission now, is to help people get from the second to the third layer.
Second to third level. Love that. And the kingdom impact that exists. One of the things I've been working on with a mentor, we've been talking about, first changing the Christian business leader, and then changing the team, and then systems and processes, which you talk about a good bit in your book, especially having run a business, that lower level you're talking about. And even without those three things, that foundation, the kingdom impact would be difficult, because you need to have all of those as participants in that journey. We have to work our way through. So I love how you define that in terms of the pyramid of 3 levels. And I can understand, again, was there a moment that you said, man, I'm not at that level yet. What am I going to do differently?
Well, now I realize in retrospect that leading me to write the book was God's way of nudging me to reflect and integrate things that I had not put together in my mind. And so it ended up that the book was probably more for me than anyone else. And my history has been one of sort of, a CEO, you get a vision and then you build, well, how do I get there? And that's not what happened here. God sort of nudged me, do this. And he wouldn't tell me the next step, and then do this, and then do this. And I'd say it took me a full 2 years to get to the point to understand that pyramid. Uh-huh. and the realization of that third layer. And there was one kind of epiphany moment. And I was in a prayer group with some other business people, and a guy in there that I did not know made the statement. He said, yeah, 30 years ago, I decided that I would make my business a platform for kingdom building. I'd never heard that phrase. So that was a point where I started to dig, and I talked to that guy. I said, what did you mean by that? And then he pointed me some other people, and pretty soon I began to realize there's this whole other way of thinking about things. And so here I am in my 70s, uncovering some of the greatest learnings of my life.
Gary, so what is kingdom impact from your perspective that you've learned? What is that? What is the outcome?
Well, Jesus in his prayer, teaching us to pray, says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And Jesus talks enormous amount about the kingdom. Well, the kingdom is when people are moved from this realm to the realm that Jesus leads. And it's really a new kind of life. I know it's mysterious. It's actually God entering into us and making us into a new kind of creature. And it sounds mysterious, but that's what it says. And I've experienced it, and it's true. And so you get moved from this realm where the world shapes you to a realm where God shapes you. And God's realm, he shapes you from the inside out. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, inside out. The world shapes us from the outside in. It conforms us. It tries to press us into its mold. And so kingdom impact is when you help somebody realize that there is this path to inside out instead of outside in. And what I think a kingdom impact business is where the owner, and I use that term precisely, ownership is something God demands. He gives us ownership and then expects us to be accountable for it. Of course, he owns everything, but stewardship and ownership are related. But when I own something, I'm responsible for it. So whoever owns a business, if they're going to be kingdom impact, they have to have a purpose, an intentional strategy to deal with people, body, soul, and spirit. And that doesn't mean you ramrod it down their throat, but you need to be intentional about those who are ready and are interested. You have a way to respond to that. That's what I think of.
I appreciate that. Kingdom impact, certainly, as you define it as well. And I love your Romans 12:1 and 12:2 analogy as you go forward, as well as, the thing that went through my mind as you were saying that is the Hebrews and the faith chapter inside of Hebrews, that it takes the, deep faith that we have, to your point, not being able to necessarily see what that is now, but to believe that there is something better there. Absolutely. So if that kingdom impact, then that's the target state. If you were to think about it, that's the ultimate outcome that exists. You mentioned, even in the title of your book, and I don't want to make any assumptions or interpret, but the built to beat chaos. So is chaos are those the barriers? Is that the barriers that keep us from achieving that target state?
Well, this is another journey I went on fairly recently. When we were thinking about the subject matter of the book, I couldn't help reflect on one of our clients in Chicago, lower east side of Chicago, which is an underserved area healthcare wise. And when COVID hit, that organization was absolutely uh, overwhelmed. I mean, completely overwhelmed, living in a large city with 3 or 4 or 5 times the demand for their services, literally overnight. They were just stretched to exhaustion. And we were working with that client, and they just kept using the word chaos, and it was a victim term. And one day I was thinking about that, and I was reading Genesis chapter 1. I really like beginnings and endings. I notice you have a beginning question and an ending question, bookends. And the beginning of the Bible is profound. Of course, we're familiar, most of us are familiar with the idea about 25 verses in that God says we're created in his image. And it begs the question, well, what does that mean? What is he like, and what is his image? And I just thought at that moment, I said, okay, what do I know at verse 25 about God? I'm made in his image. What do I know about him? So I went back to verse 1, and it hit me like, I've never seen this before. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens, the earth, and they were void and without form. And it dawned on me for the very first time that the first thing God created was chaos. It wasn't light. It wasn't the other things that happened in those 7 transformative stages. It was chaos. And so my belief is that what he's modeling for us is he's telling us something, that he is a God who created chaos as a raw material from which he began to bring order. And we are created in his image to have dominion, which is a form of bringing order out of chaos. So that really kind of set me free. It caused me to think chaos is not really our enemy. Ordering it is our purpose. And I quit thinking of chaos as with a victim mindset.
Of that. So, and I saw this in your book too. You encourage leaders to embrace the constraints that are in front of them and not to see it as a victim as you go forward. I love it. Let's dive into maybe the book just a little bit as more of the content, what many of the listeners are looking for as well. You break it down really into 3 sections. It's a playbook for leaders to execute, is what I see in terms. And you break it down into knowing, doing, and being. You can't possibly cover all those things in the last 10 minutes or so in terms of what we have in the interview. But I had a couple of things I thought were interesting. There was a framework that you had that said being an effective leader requires being a student of desire, which moved to reason, to intention, to action. So, but it requires that first step, be a student of desire. Can you expand on that a little bit for me? Tell me about that.
Yes, I'm a person who believes that God reveals himself through everything, creation, through the Bible, and science. So there's to me no conflict that if we discover something that's true in science, it tells us something about God. And it's interesting that we made all this progress. A sociology teacher in my first college class asked the most profound question I've ever been asked, and it shaped my life journey. He says, why is it we've advanced so much as a civilization technologically and advanced zero or regressed sociologically? That pursuit of that question ultimately led me to Christ. But anyway, what we can progress and build things because the laws of science, the way things hook together, are predictable. So electromagnetic energy, one generation to the next can build on its learning and pass it on. But when it comes to leadership, we're called to get people to work together. And people are not like atoms. They don't bind and hook together in the same way with the same predictable rules. And what that means is that one of the first characteristics of a leader is they have to understand that their leadership is dealing with human architecture, not the chemistry of human architecture, not physics. And the Bible teaches us that there's four main components of the way we're made up. A heart, a source of desire, someplace that we wake up in the morning and we want something. We don't do anything if we don't have some desire. And then there's a mind, a reason, a way, something that translates our desire into, no, that's not a good idea, or here's how to pursue that. The mind takes the desire and puts some shape to it. And ultimately, we get in our mind what we want to do. Okay, I'm going to the mall today. That's the imagination. You get in your mind, this is what I'm going to do. And it can be a house you're imagining. It can be whatever. I think Stephen Covey or somebody called that the first creation. We always get something in our mind before we do it, and then action. So those four components, if you're going to be a leader, we often see the actions and don't like them. And we react to the actions in anger and frustration, et cetera, when in fact, the actions fed out of the imagination, and the imagination fed out of the reason, and the reason fed out of the desire. You will be a much, much better leader if you quit reacting to the actions and diagnose what is the underlying desire behind it. And often, if you're like me, you don't really understand your own desires. You're not quite sure why you just did what you did. And so good leaders help. They have this awareness that they have these four things going on inside of them, and everybody they work with has it going on, and they begin to try to help uncover the desire part of it in their life and in others, and it helps us integrate and work together when we become students of desire. Long answer, but
No, I appreciate that, going all the way through it in terms of how that flows and how that reaches back to understanding our desire right at the start before we can, to your point, have actions that even mean anything. There are others. I mean, the Far Side cartoon, it talks about we work really hard, climb the ladder, get to the top, and we find out we're in the wrong jungle or had the ladder against the wrong wall, in terms of climbing a tree. I mean, those things happen. So we got to understand that desire at the start, and we keep those things in line. So when you work with other leaders who want to establish then the habit learning systems that you're talking about, how do you get them started? Where do you get them started?
My. Well, I appreciate you said earlier you're kind of a scientist where you think about lean. Didn't you mention lean?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And getting people to change there's nothing harder, me included. And so we have found that the best use of our time, at least early on, is really challenging the leader to decide what is it that you want. We have surface level answers for that, but this is back to being a student of desire. You need to help people understand, what do I really want for this business? And if they get that fire lit, if they really understand that, then they have the motivation to start doing the things to change. But if you try to do this surface level, force people at the action level into a mold, outside in transformation, it doesn't last. It just does not last. And you got to get back to the desire side. So
I think you're spot on. I mean, people change when the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of the change itself. Change is hard. There's no doubt about it. And sometimes it's more comfortable to stay in that space of underperformance than it is the discomfort of moving into your learning zone and trying something different. And again, if we're going to have kingdom impact, then it's required that we become uncomfortable in the work that we're doing. There's no doubt about it. If you are comfortable, you should be uncomfortable, because there's something that within your business that's not achieving what it could be achieving. Absolutely. Gary, I sense that you're a student as well. Look at the back of your book. You've got your resources listed that you have learned from. Is there a specific book or resource that you have found that's had significant impact on your leadership style?
Well, I do find I'm stating the obvious here, but I do find that the Bible is truly a blueprint for reality. So that takes first place. Books that have really helped me think more deeply about the purpose side of my life. I like Os Guinness's book, The Call. He really digs deeply into the false idea that holy work is church work or missionary work. And I think his was the first book. I probably read it now 5 times, but his was the first book that said there really is no distinction. All work is holy. God created us to live in his purpose. And that seed has really helped give meaning to everything else I do.
Thanks for sharing that, Gary. I cannot believe how fast our time has gone. Gary, folks who'd be interested in learning more about your book or about you, where do they find that information?
Oh, go to our website, leadfirst.com, or not .com. Take that away. Leadfirst.ai. By the way, we picked the AI the name before it became popular in AI. So, but anyway, leadfirst.ai. I make a weekly update there, and my books are there, and our services. We have business services to help organizations pull this off.
Excellent. Gary, I've enjoyed our conversation today. I know the listeners are going to find value in it. Gary, I'm going to honor your time, and I want to finish you up with the same last question, the bookend question, as you refer to it, that I always have with my first-time guests. And I'm going to give you a billboard. You can put it wherever you want to. What is the message that you put on that billboard, and why do you put that billboard? Why do you put that message on there?
Well, I personally think it's a passage from the Bible, and it says, "If any man be in Christ, he is a new creature." And I love science fiction movies. And one of the themes in science fiction movies is there's this alien invasion. Somehow an alien comes and snatches our bodies or takes control. And if you really read the Bible carefully, there's the universe that God created, and then there's God outside of the universe. And the gospel says that God brings his life, it's called Zoe, life, from outside the universe and puts it in me and in you. And that verse says, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. It doesn't say an improved creature. It says a new creature. And I think it's the most profound truth that is not understood. It took me a while to understand that God doesn't imply a better life. He implies a new life. Yes, we still have our body and all these things that are here, but from an eternal point of view, it's a different life. So that's what I'd put on a billboard.
Thank you very much, Gary. I tell you, this conversation has been a lot of fun. I hope that we can stay in touch. I wish you the best going forward as well.
Thank you for what you do, John. You're a form of bringing order out of chaos, right? You bring people who have different insights, and thank you for what you do. It's very valuable.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate the feedback, Gary. Thank you.